Ви загрузили нову презентацію, яку я прислав. Так. Дякую.
Hello, everyone. Apologies for a slight technical delay with starting our webinar. Today, we start our first webinar in the series of our Doing Business in Ukraine webinars. And this webinar is exclusively devoted to issues of privatization. And we called it Untapped Investment Opportunities in Ukraine because Ukraine, as you know, remains one of the few remaining countries in which privatization has not actually been completed. So today, during this webinar, we have our guest speaker, Yeleyko, the Deputy Chairman of the State Property Fund of Ukraine, who deals on a daily basis with the process of privatization, with the sales of various assets, with large and small scale privatization. And he will tell us about the current state of privatization in Ukraine, will present the challenges that the State Property Fund is facing today. As you see, we are having this event both online and offline today in our office. And we welcome any questions that you may have to Taras and to ourselves. We either will respond to them in the course of this webinar or after the webinar, because we only have 1 hour for these questions. Also, we have Tetyana Dovgan here with me, our M&A and corporate partner, who will share her experience with representing foreign investors and on various deals, and will explain the basics of what an investor expects from a successful privatization in Ukraine. And we also have Conlon, who is joining us online from Warsaw, and who will share his experience of successful M&A deals and what needs to be actually improved in the privatization process to actually make the sales much more successful and at higher value than they are today. And of course, you have myself, Ihor Olekhov. I'm a partner, head of banking and finance group, and I will moderate the discussion and will lead the questions and also say why finance may also be possible for, or financing such deals as privatization may become possible in the future in Ukraine, and why acquisition finance is important for privatization. So now I pass the floor to Taras to tell us about the State Property Fund, what successes have already been achieved this year and what are the prospects for the future. And we will obviously show the presentation of Taras in a second.
Yeah. Thank you, Ihor. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce to you and your colleagues the privatization process as it is right now, because really the privatization process changed dramatically during last 3 years, and now we have the real privatization. I will call it real because it's conducted only through the electronic auctions, because in Ukraine, frankly speaking, Ihor really pointed a very interesting topic, raised a very interesting topic. Ukraine, can you to move to the next slide? Ukraine is one of the few countries in the world that still has the initial state property market of state property assets. As you see, really Ukraine conducted privatization during like 30 years. Right now it's third wave of privatization. We can call it in this way because first wave of privatization was through privatization certificates. The second wave was through investment memorandums, and right now the privatization law from 2018 was changed, and all privatization is conducted through, as I mentioned, through electronic auctions, and the winner and the buyer of all these assets is the person who provided the highest price during the auction. So everything is very simple. As you see, Ukraine still has, even despite 30 years of privatization, Ukraine still has a lot of assets for to privatize, and that can be provided to initial market. So let's take a look at in more details at these assets. So here we can see the numbers of state-owned enterprises, that is in Ukraine and other countries. You can see dramatic amount of these enterprises in Ukraine, at least more than 10 times comparing to Poland or to Hungary. Can you move to the next slide, please? If you will see and go a little bit deeper into details, we will see that among these 3.7 thousand enterprises, there are roughly 800 that is really important to the state and will stay in as state property. Around 585 it's in Crimea and Ator, so it's currently occupied territories, but we will believe that in the future we will be able to deal with these territories, and we will return these territories definitely. Also, around 100 it's enterprises that belong to National Academy of Science. Around 1,100 is totally empty enterprises that should be liquidated. Unfortunately, the state is not always a good manager of the enterprises. And as we see, and around 1,000 are enterprises that are ready for privatization. As we see from this picture, the state in Ukraine currently manage lots of enterprises. Among them we can see hotels, barber shops, small grocery shops, some strange servicing enterprises that provide like really sometimes strange services. And it's not the question of state policy. So the state took the political decision in 2019, and we have in Ukraine, so right now there is a very straight political will to privatize and to move to privatization all these 1,000 enterprises. In 2018, the state, the parliament canceled the law that determined around 800 enterprises prohibited for privatization. Also, President signed the order that told that we have to privatize at least 300 objects this year. So we are close to this point, and we have to move all objects that is not like really needed for the state to privatization. So the parliament also took the decision in 2019 to move for privatization around 600 in 2019-2012 to move for privatization around 600 enterprises. It's very, interesting numbers, because the state property fund is Ukraine is like sale agency, it's privatization agency. We are not in charge of managing of all these 3.7 thousand enterprises. We are in charge of privatization, and we manage these enterprises only during the privatization process. So comparing, if you compare the numbers during previous 10 years, for privatization, the government transferred only 100 enterprises. During last year, for privatization, were transferred around 600 enterprises. So there is a huge political will to privatize these assets. So can we move to the next slide? The privatization. Okay. Okay. So the privatization is split into two streams. One stream is small privatization. The second stream is large-scale privatization. It's divided into streams according to the law, and all assets that are that have book value below 250 million hryvnias, it's around $10 million. A little, like, okay, right now it's even $9 million. $9 million, it's small privatization, and all assets with book value according to local accounting standards above $9 million, it's big privatization. So the difference is in conducting the privatization process, because small privatization is conducted by state property fund, and big privatization is conducted with attraction of sale advisors, like investment advisors, that should prepare the asset according to M&A standards, and state property fund is more in this process like a supervisor of this process. So large-scale privatization is conducted very similar to M&A deals. So right now we have, if you move to the next slide, right now we have around okay, it's even more. The numbers are currently even bigger. It's roughly 1,000 objects for small privatization. It's a state-owned enterprises, different property complex, separate property, unfinished constructions, and 26 objects of big privatization. If you are talking about small privatization, we changed the approach to this privatization, really changed it during last 1 year when the new team was appointed. So previously, small privatization was conducted even according to the law on electronic auctions, but the question is how you can acquire the asset, the enterprise, if you are talking about enterprise, if you don't have enough information to conduct all type of due diligences. So the law requires only to put the asset on Prozorro, a sale platform, and to describe a very short like information about the asset, the name, the total area of premises, the number of workers, and usually that's all. So we totally changed this construction, and announcement, can you imagine, the announcement about small privatization was published into the newspaper, special newspaper, with total amount 200 hard copies.
It was very difficult to locate, yes.
It was terribly difficult to locate. It was terribly difficult to find out what is privatized. Sometimes this hard.
The font is also very, very small in that newspaper. It's very hard to read. So.
Yeah. So right now we totally changed this construction. So right now we launched a very transparent internet site, privatization.gov.ua, where all list of objects you can see all list of objects for privatization. Also, we moved the small privatization into more or less classic M&A deal approach. So definitely for every object of small privatization, we develop teasers, we form virtual data room on ideals basis right now. You can see all initial documents about every object in internet from any point of the world. After that, when the object is prepared for privatization, we announce the auction, and we announce the auction. And what do I mean under announcing of the auction? I mean that we start listing period. So the listing period is usually for small privatization around 30 days. So you have roughly 1 month to conduct all type of due diligences, but definitely you have to hire local lawyers, local companies that will help you with all these due diligences, because materials and all initial documentation is in Ukrainian, definitely. But we disclose all information, exactly everything that has the company, everything that has a state property fund, everything is disclosed. So roughly for every object we disclose, like in average, right now we are selling the alcohol, the spirit producers. So for every producer, we disclose around 4,000 hard copies of initial documents. So everything, from the property ownerships to technical details of every, like asset in this company. So you can conduct due diligences, and after that, participate in the auction. All auctions for small privatization are held on Prozorro. So you can, I think that your colleagues will help you to get registered for these auctions and to participate in these auctions. Everything is very transparent. About the restrictions, I'm sorry, who can participate in the privatization? So in Ukraine, according to the law, there is only a few restrictions for participants. The first restriction is about capital structure. It should be fully disclosed. The second restriction is about beneficial owners. The beneficial owners can't be from Russia. So, and that's about the restrictions. Everybody else can participate in the privatization and definitely becomes a new efficient owners of state property. Because currently we move to privatization a huge amount of different type of state property, and you can choose whatever property you would like, whatever investment ideas you would like, all over the Ukraine. On our internet site, you can also see the map of the objects. So the Ukraine is covered with these objects. In every region, you can find different type of objects. So it's like from property to some producers of fertilizers and so on and so on. So can we move to the next slide? So about and what happened after the change of approach to privatization. So we've got the first numbers because we are working like, okay, 1 year. The new head of state property fund just celebrated 1 year on the position. So if you move to the numbers, so auction results, as of now, it's even old numbers. As of now, the auction results are around 2 billion hryvnias. It proceeds to the budget from the small privatization. During previous 10 years from small privatization, the maximum proceeds to the budgets, to the state budget was 500 million hryvnias. So right now, during first 9 months, and according to total change of approach to privatization, we've got the proceed 2 billion hryvnias, and by the end of the year, we expect the proceeds from small privatization up to 3 billion hryvnias. So the second number is even more interesting because it's the average number of participants. It's about competition. After the total change of procedures and approach to informational disclosure, we see that the average amount of participants raised from 2 up to 3.1 participant, and it's very interesting number because it shows we conducted 1.6 thousand auctions, and it's very interesting number because it shows the average temperature, you know, on our privatization market, and it shows a really increase of competition. And what we can observe is that this number is steadily growing, you know, and it's very interesting because more and more people get familiar with privatization. More and more people have got understanding, comprehensive understanding that, okay, you can participate in the privatization without, you know, any unofficial, like it's called, restrictions. So you shouldn't find this hard copy of newspaper of 200 hard copies. You shouldn't have any, you know, like friends of yours in state property fund or regional branch of state property fund. You can simply get to internet site, conduct your own due diligence in VDR and participate in the auction. So, and we conducted the total amount of auctions. You can see more than 1.6 thousand during 9 months. So the amount of auctions is really huge, and we are moving forward.
How many of those auctions included foreign investors?
Really, it's difficult to tell, but what we saw, for example, I think the most like interesting auction was for Dnipro Hotel in downtown of Kiev. It's maybe one of the best locations in Ukraine. So we've got 29 participants on this auction.
Ну, зараз видно.
Hello everyone again. Apologies, we had some technical problem with our system. Now we will resume our webinar. In the meantime, we of course discussed a lot of issues, but you will get the record of this. You will get the record of this webinar and will be able to hear everything else that we have discussed. So now, Taras, so we were discussing the Dnipro Hotel and your success and the other objects of small organization.
Yeah. So we were discussing definitely. One of the most bright option was for Dnipro Hotel. So we got 99 participants, and the auction is constructed in the way that we don't know who are the participants by the end of the auction, and we see the participants. We see only the numbers of participants. We see the participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, and only at the end of the auction, when the final bid is provided, we see simultaneously with everybody on the internet site the names of participants and who is the winner. So, so everybody are welcome to our auctions, and here is the example of our internet site and different types of objects. So, as I've told, we developed the new Ukrainian and English version of internet site, Privatisation.ui, so you can browse and see all assets that are provided for privatization. As I've told, sometimes it's big companies. Sometimes it's like big former institutes from the National Academy of Science with big area available for lease in downtowns. But sometimes it's separate objects like abandoned grocery shops. So you can find lots of stuff, and everything is definitely is on internet site. So you don't have any, like high hidden assets. So everything is disclosed. So can we move? So you can browse. Simultaneously, what I would like to emphasize maybe separately a little bit. So last year, the new law about alcohol industry was adopted. And in Ukraine, maybe you heard this strange story, but Ukraine was one of only 2 countries in Europe that has a monopoly for alcohol producers. So not exactly for vodka, but for spirit production and spirit distribution. That was a state monopoly. So the state owns, as of now, 78 spirit producers. And the demonopolization, it was like a very expected step for Ukraine, but to this step, the country waited for the last 30 years. Yeah. Because the similar situation with monopoly is only in Belarus and in Ukraine. And right now we are not even opening the market because all state-owned spirit producers will be sold. But we are creating a huge new market, totally new market with rules that will set on this market. And what are the plans according to the law that was adopted? According to the law, you can get the license for spirit production up to 1st July 2021. Only in case if you would buy state-owned spirit producer. After this date, you will be able to get the license even for new constructed production, so and produce the spirit. But the country aims by this date provide to the transparent privatization auctions all 79 enterprises that can produce spirit and are currently state-owned. We announced already 6 auctions, and we expect a huge amount of interest because spirit is like not only for vodka, it's for chemical industry, it's for definitely alcohol producers. It's a commodity, and even Ukraine is agro country, definitely agro country, and it's the way how the agro producers can proceed corn and wheat, and we believe that we will have a huge export oriented industry in Ukraine in 2-3 years. So everybody are welcome to participate in these auctions and participate in the demonopolization of alcohol industry in Ukraine, because it will be a very active process in the next year, maybe half a year. So every week we announce 2 new auctions for spirit producers. So next step, please. Next slide, please. So here you can see the map with spirit producers in Ukraine. They are divided by types: food alcohol, bioethanol, and technical denaturated ethyl alcohol. So as I told, we have 78 producers, and we are moving to privatization. But certainly,
one small question which some participants are asking, whether this information is accessible on the website privatization.
Yes, it's accessible in Ukrainian and in English. Also on the internet site, you can find a very precise information how you can participate in the auction, how you can get access to information, to virtual data room, what documents are required, what are the legislation. All legislation is like gathered on internet site, so we gathered like, I don't know, 3 laws are 18 or 17 decrets of the parliament, of the cabinet of ministers, and something like a few 30 or 40 different orders that regulate the alcohol industry in Ukraine. So everything is gathered on internet site in Ukrainian and English. Everything is translated, so you can get, and teasers are also translated, so you can get bilingual access to all assets. So next slide, and here you can see, as I understand, next slide. Okay, so it's about alcohol industry. So I would like also to tell a few words about big privatization, large-scale privatization. So currently, we hired advisors for 5 objects of large-scale privatization, and also we will have very soon the advisor for the 6th object. So about this object, the first object that we are expecting for and will be moved to large-scale privatization, and we believe that the auction will be announced this year, is United Mining and Chemical Company. It's the biggest producer of titanium ore in Europe, and as I understand, the only producer of titanium ore in Europe. So it's very huge. It's 2 very huge quarries, and it's a really big company with 4,000 employees, and we expect to announce the auction for this company by the end of this year. So the next slide, please. The next company is OPP. Odessa Port Side Plant. It's fertilizer producer. Right now, the advisors is working and preparing this company for privatization. Definitely, we expect that the privatization will be held in 2021. Why such long time period? Because the main question is the debts that this company holds, unfortunately, and the question how to deal with these debts. So the advisor have to deal with this question. And we expect also this company will be moved to privatization. So next slide, please. The third company is Electrovazhmash. So it's big machinery building companies that is producing with 4,000 employees. Also, it's placed in Kharkiv and is producing the generator for hydroelectric station and the engines for locomotives, electric engines for locomotives. It's also very big, very interesting high-tech producer. So, and it's also right now moved to privatization. The advisor KPMG is working on this project, and we believe that the privatization will be held in the first half of 2021. So also we selected the advisor, right now also KPMG for very interesting company. It will be also big privatization. Unfortunately, I don't have the slide here for this company, but the name of this company is, the commonly known name is Bolshevik. It was a company that produced some part of weapons, some tracks, tires, but right now the production cycle is very, very limited on this company, and this company owns around 34 hectares in the downtown. That can be, and the profile of the company can be changed definitely. The production can be moved in some, I don't know, other place, and you will have a huge land plot in downtown, ideal for development projects. Real ideal near underground station with all communications. I think the police know it.
Yes.
It's one of the best locations that can be developed as not joint development project.
When is it expected to be
We believe it will be first quarter 2021. So that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention, and the questions are welcome.
Also, first question, Taras, which I have. I mean, we all hear about privatization for many years, and we are actually very happy that at last the state property funds started to move forward with privatization. However, when we prepared for this event, I asked our CEE colleagues in Poland, in Romania, and other countries, and they were telling me, you know, in our countries, privatization happened 25 years, 30 years ago, so we hardly remember anything. So when do you expect this whole process will be completed?
Okay, if everything will be in place as it is right now, so I'm talking about definitely economic situation, political will, ability and capability of state property fund, we expect that we will finish this process in 3 years. So we developed the internal procedures that allows us to move to privatization up to 200-300 enterprises per year annually. So it's a huge amount. Frankly speaking, we developed internal investment bank. Everything is described, what should be done, in what way, what documents should be collected, how which foundation should be created. And we believe that 3 years will be enough to finalize this process. But definitely it will depend on lots of external factors. Yeah.
Okay. So in 3 years it will take for this process to be completed. And the biggest number of objects will be within this year or the next year?
I think 2021. Because this year definitely, we already showed a very great numbers compared to previous years. But we understood that, okay, we have to do a very huge homework before we move all these objects to privatization, because the property fund wasn't ready to proceed such huge amount of objects. It wasn't ready because it didn't deal with such huge amount. It wasn't ready as from technical side. Also, it wasn't ready from like market approach side, because how can you conduct such huge privatization when you are publishing the announcement only in newspaper? It's impossible, you know. You will have not the successful privatization. You will have definitely the redistribution of property from the state to. We changed dramatically internal procedures. We definitely developed the new approaches we developed, and the most even interesting side. Can you believe that we applied virtual data rule for the first time ever in history of privatization?
We were going to compliment you on this one because that's something that we see in M&A deals. That is something that investors do expect, not just in the context of large-scale privatizations, but also complementary to the Ihor hotel privatization. We saw this in the small-scale privatization.
Yeah, for every object.
For every object. And interestingly enough, we were discussing this when, unfortunately, we went online for a moment. I was asking the questions to Taras, how much of an interaction was there between the potential purchasers, and applicants and the fund in relation to the information that was uploaded to iDeals, VDR. And Taras was saying, could you please share this information with the audience? How much of an interaction, how did you respond to applicants, how quickly did you do it, and did you make the answers available to other applicants?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's important because definitely we have some amount of requests, but what can I tell that the amount of requests decreased dramatically since the virtual data rooms for every object were launched. So, for example, for Micro Hotel, we've got something like 7 requests from different companies. And what we did, because we understood that these requests or the questions will be similar in lots of participants. So when we got the request, definitely we were provided the answer during 2-3 days. But what we did, we uploaded the request and all answers into virtual data room. So the request and the answers were available for everybody. And we are applying this approach for all other privatization processes right now, because we understand that we don't have anything to hide, and we understand that the most questions will be similar, or at least more or less similar, from real participants. Definitely we have the questions like, okay, what will be the weather on the auction? Sometimes we definitely have such questions.
You respond to those as well.
We should respond according to the law.
You should respond.
Yeah, but for real business issues, we are uploading all information as request, also the answers to virtual data room and make it available for everyone.
And did you receive any complaints from anybody saying that all the information was not exhaustive, or you found that
Thank God, we were successful in this way. Yeah, because we tried, if your goal is to conduct as transparent auction as possible and to show that, because we need to return, liability of, reliability maybe of the state agencies. So we should do everything as transparent as possible, disclose and react to all the requests as soon as possible, because we understand that only in such way we will be able to attract the biggest amount of investors.
Including foreign investors who do expect to see this interaction in the context of privatizations.
And what can I tell you? We definitely see foreign investors right now that are participating in the privatization, because Ukraine, as we started our discussion, is one of a few maybe countries in Europe that still has the initial state asset market. Definitely, in lots of cases, it's like a little bit distressed assets, but the prices reflect also all the circumstances. So you can participate and you can acquire very interesting objects, but sometimes it's difficult to acquire in developed countries.
Taras, before we proceed to very specific questions regarding the structuring elections and privatization, one general question which I think is probably kind of more philosophical and more to approach on the state of the fund. Is it the policy that the fund really needs to collect a huge amount of revenue? You showed today that this year the fund collected nearly 2 billion. But as I understand how privatization happened in other countries, the task of the privatization was just to get rid of everything, even at $1 or €1, just to get this industry back basically shaped just to encourage foreign investors to come even for this minimum price. So what is the policy in this respect? Is still to get the revenues, to get the highest price for the objects, or really to basically call it a day and sell everything?
As I see, we would like to finish the discussion on this question. So you raised a very philosophical question that can be applied because I have a huge amount of arguments on this question, and we broke a huge amount of like specific spheres. With lots of international like not donors but IFIs, there's lots of internal politicians. Because definitely the privatization, and you are exactly right, the privatization is not about the budget proceeds. It's not about the money. Because, for example, in Poland, in average, I see the researchers that told that in average for €1 received from privatization, the additional investments in these objects were from €4 to €6. So it's not about the money. But right now, the privatization process is constructed in the way that the new owner of the object is the winner of the auction. We are not asking the development strategy. We are not asking the like what people are going to do with this or this object. And definitely right now we are dealing for very complicated objects. We are definitely putting some post-privatization conditions. That okay, you can't fire the people. You should keep the operational activity in this precise direction. But for lots of other objects, like for unfinished construction, or like for hotel, or like different type of objects, or like for factories such as producing mugs, for example, or even for like alcohol producers. What is the aim to apply post-privatization objects to keep the production of the mugs if this factory is totally unsuccessful and it failed like during 40 years, it shows totally losses. So here we try to move in a little bit different approach. So we are creating the most efficient owner for big scale privatization, definitely there is a condition to keep the production and so on and so on. For small scale privatization, we are trying to find the efficient owners through the like investment amount. Because if you are investing the highest amount of money, real market price, definitely you will not ruin the object, the privatization object. Because what is the purpose to ruin it and to scrap the metal? You should get the IRR on your investments. So, and this approach shows the best results in Ukraine, because if you are trying to control everything after privatization, unfortunately, the control as Ukraine is not so efficient, maybe as in Europe. So here we are trying to create, on one side, we are trying to create control. On another side, we are trying to create really market factors that will, like push the new owners to conduct as, effective business as possible in this objects, privatized objects. So it's, as I've told, it's very complicated questions, and it can't be applied very strictly and copies from one country to another country, because it depends on lots of factors, and especially internal factors.
Okay, Taras, maybe more specific questions regarding application of English, because we are an English program, and obviously this is something that we do on a daily basis. What is your impression of application of English for the transaction documents? Has it been tested well, and how the fund deals with this?
we understand that it's not been tested just yet, because the new privatization legislation, which we as advisors, we view this very, very positively, and we see that it has been applied successfully to small-scale privatizations, but not yet in the context of large-scale privatizations. So we do have this ability to apply English law to large-scale privatization SPAs until currently the 1st of January of next year. Yeah. And so this term will expire very soon, and we hear from various announcements, including from the fund, that to satisfy the IMF requirements in particular, you are going to extend this term. Are we talking about another 3-year term, or are we talking about unlimited? Because this is something that we would definitely welcome to see, and the foreign investors will welcome to see unlimited application of English law in time.
Exactly.
What's your take on this?
As of now, we are going to extend this period, and we are going to provide to the Parliament the new amendment to the laws that will extend this period at least by 3 years. Because the situation is a little bit weird, because, okay, we have this in the law, but it wasn't applied yet. So we don't know what is the real practice. So currently we can sign the SPA agreements based on English law. And I believe that for big-scale privatization, after the first auctions that we would conduct in the last 12 years, we will sign the SPA on English law. We will see how it works. And if it's successful, I believe that we will extend this period.
So basically, it was a trial period, the first 3 years, to see how it works out, how it works for the fund, because it certainly works for the investors, and this is something investors would expect to see. So this is definitely something that kind of we're asked by foreign investors who are looking to invest in Ukraine, and this is something that they certainly expect to see. So that is great news. So in particular, kind of what is the mood of the fund towards the English law? I mean, yes, it's in the law, but do you feel internally that this is something you will be willing to test out on one of the upcoming privatizations, large-scale privatizations? You have advisors already, yes? So so hopefully that should make the process easier.
Exactly, it will definitely make the process easier of application of English law. And what can I tell? How the fund estimates the English law? Certainly, we estimate it as a very positive, because we understand that in Ukraine, as frontier market, the application of such approach is very beneficial for investors, especially for international investors. But we will have I believe that next year we will have our first experience of dealing with this, and we will be able to make our consequences, what is the most efficient way to deal with English law.
Yes.
Maybe on this note, I asked actually Graham to join us to share his expertise and to say us a few words why English law is important for transaction documents in privatizations. And if possible, we will now connect them to our discussion.
I'm here. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Graham, we can see you.
Can you hear me?
But cannot hear you, unfortunately.
I can hear you, Graham.
Okay. But in the room you can't hear me?
Looks like, but the panelists can hear you, Graham. So you can start speaking, and we will resolve the issue with the conference room.
Okay.
Maybe Graham, you start speaking, because the participants might already hear what you're saying, but we cannot. I will just.
Okay. I will start. So I think I think if you put yourself in the shoes of an investor, especially a foreign investor, investors are nervous in any M&A transaction. They are going to be nervous because they are buying an asset, they are buying a company which they do not know. So I think it's very good to hear of all of the progress that the State Property Fund has made and the direction that the country
That was a good try, but
is, okay, I think it's probably best if I just pause a little bit here because of the technical issues.
Graham, I think you can continue speaking, unmute them, and we will resolve the issue.
So essentially, buyers will always be nervous when they're buying something. If each of us imagine that we are buying something, it's natural to be nervous about what we are buying. We want to make sure that everything is going to work okay. If we're buying a car, we want to know that the car has an engine, that it works, that there's, it's not going to fall to bits, the day that we drive it off the garage forecourt. So by analogy with investors, it's something similar. They want to know what they are buying. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect, of course, but they want to know and have a full picture, a full disclosure as to how the picture looks, so that they are able to come up with their valuation accordingly. And the way that these things usually work is that the sellers would give a number of protections and assurances in favor of the buyer. These assurances take the form in particular of representations and warranties, could be indemnities, guarantees, which basically say, yes, the car's got an engine, the engine's in good working condition, we own the car, there's nothing wrong with it, etc., etc. So I think the issue with Ukrainian law is that Ukrainian law itself is not, has not yet caught up, I would say, with other countries around in terms of how to implement something like this. They don't, the law does not yet have the sophistication that foreign investors would expect to give them the assurances and the protection that investors need. And hence why English law is very popular, especially for Ukraine. In our kind of experience, probably 90% of deals with foreign investors coming into the country are governed by foreign law. And in 90% of those deals, it's typically English law. So it would definitely be, I think, a major attraction to be for the state property fund and for privatizations to be governed by English law wherever possible. I think even if it is governed by English law, though, again, we still need to understand what investors want. They need to be sure, especially buying a state-owned enterprise, which has been under state ownership for many years. Some of these assets are probably in better condition than others. Even those that are in good condition, there will be issues with them. There will be problems. It's normal for there to be problems. On every single M&A transaction, without fail, there is a problem. That's just life. And the trick, again, is for the buyer to know what those problems are so that they are able to effectively draft and negotiate and protect and deal with that issue before they acquire the asset. So I think one of the things which I think could really help the country as a whole is if there could be an ability to have a little bit more of a two-way dialogue between, for example, the winning bidder and the state, so that this, there is a negotiation process, so that terms and conditions can be crafted and tailored specifically to the concerns that may have been identified in relation to the business. I understand that's probably not something which will come easily because it probably will require a change in the process and the law, but it is something that I think which could really help the process and help the government to sell assets going forward. I think also, again, there will be issues with these companies because there always are. There are issues even with privately owned companies. But the more issues there are, the more likely the buyer will say, okay, but I just can't accept these legacy historic risks. It's, on the one hand, it's a question of price. Buyers want to be sure that they're not overpaying for what they are buying. So that's why they want to know what the issues are so that they can calculate the price accordingly. if they don't get that assurance, if they don't get those representations of warranties and guarantees, indemnities that are customary on a M&A transaction, then one or two things will happen. At worst, the investor will say, okay, this is too risky, I'm just not going to participate. Or at best, they will say, okay, well, if I'm not getting the protection that I need, then I'm going to have to reduce the purchase price accordingly, pretty significantly, typically, in order to address that need. So I think these are the types of things that need to be kind of considered from an investor perspective. A really nice way to address all of these would be, if there was a possibility for privatizations to take the form of asset deals, for example, where buyers can actually can pick and choose the assets that they want, but leave behind those legacy issues that may be lurking somewhere in the background. So, for example, if there's only been, especially for foreign investors, I mean, for them, it's very important to be buying into a transparent and compliant company. And if they can't get that assurance, then they will be potentially nervous about participating in the first place, and which can be solved if they have the ability to purchase the assets instead of the overall company itself. Again, I know that's not something which can be easily fixed, because it again will require a change of the law, but it's something which which would help the government and the state to be able to sell the assets, probably for a higher purchase price, and in a greater to a greater extent of the number of assets they'll finally sell to investors. Those are my thoughts, but I don't know to what. Can you hear me in the room?
Yes, Graham, we can hear you. Thank you for these comments, which are very helpful. Yeah, definitely. Well, at least it looks to me that the State Property Fund did not yet have sufficient experience of applying English law. Maybe Tanya will share some more ideas on this.
Yeah, we'll share some more thoughts on this. Definitely picking up on what Graham has said, that these are all the key things that the investors would expect. And I think that the fund has made some really good steps towards making it happen. Yeah, we did. I wanted to say just generally, we complement the new law, the privatization law that we have been living in for a couple of years now. We do believe that it has dealt with a number of issues that we ourselves have been raising in our various privatization publications, privatization initiatives, the things that would make a foreign investor want to invest more in Ukraine. So these are the things as English law, possibility of using foreign arbitration, to which I also understand that the fund is open to test it out, especially having having experienced counsel on board to be able to advise on those issues. Then kind of another revolutionary change is an anti-leakage protection for investors, meaning that there are some restrictions around the disposal of the asset and the transactions in relation to the target company in between, after commencement of the privatization process. So these are like really good things which we believe will make this process more successful when the right time comes. And you mentioned this kind of new law by which you will extend this 3-year period where you will have an ability to apply English law. Are there any other changes that the fund is contemplating to implement in the privatization law to make sure that it's as attractive to foreign investors as possible? Do you have any internal ideas and thoughts, kind of what else can be done? Maybe some of the things that Graham has mentioned would be good to know.
Definitely. We developed the package of amendments to the current law, because what we see on the practical applications that there are some issues that should be resolved, and we can't move it without the law changes in the law. So one of these issues is extending of period for English law. Definitely, also we are going to, as I mentioned, some of the assets that are moved to privatization are a little bit semi-distressed, let's call it in this way. Some part of the assets can be frozen according to the tax debts, something like that. So we are applying right now, and we believe that we will apply the amendments to the law that will allow us to sell such assets, and the new owners will have to deal with all questions, internal questions in these assets, because currently it's impossible to sell the assets if it's under tax arrest or something like that. But sometimes the question is like 100,000 hryvnias, and we can't sell the asset because the state-owned factory doesn't have any money at all. So, and the price of this factory can be like a few million hryvnias. So we will believe that we will resolve all these questions. And definitely there are some amendments that will make the privatization process even more transparent and more stable according to some changes to SPFU law that regulates the SPFU activity. Yes. We are going to change the SPFU to make it more similar to really investment agency. Because right now it's central government body with all restrictions and.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. And probably just the last question on this for me on the procedure. We're now in the middle of pandemic. Yeah, we're in the quarantine, and for this reason, the large-scale privatizations they're being prepared for, but the actual auctions they're put on hold. Yeah, until the quarantine is over. If the situation continues, yeah, unfortunately with the pandemic and the quarantine, and given your ambitious plans, yeah, to proceed with the large-scale privatizations, do you envisage a situation where you may wish to pursue online auctions with those, similar to what you've done with the Dnipro case? Obviously, the Dnipro is a small scale asset, yeah, but if the situation persists, do you believe that there may be some developments in this respect, or still only physical auctions would take?
No. I believe that we will hold online auctions. We don't have the right now. We don't have the limitation exactly only to the physical auctions, frankly speaking, in the law. The question is that, okay, definitely you mentioned a very, like interesting point that we have some restrictions for big privatization. We've got it was a political decision of the parliament at the beginning of this pandemic. In the March, they forbidden us to conduct preparation of the objects to privatization and conducting the objects. Right now, they 1.5 months ago, they amended the law. They have allowed us to conduct preparation of the objects to large-scale privatization, but banned the auctions. And what we are right now, we are discussing with the Parliament committee that if we will prepare the first object for big privatization, they will unfroze this process and allow us to conduct the auctions. So it's more like political questions that is
than anything else.
Yeah, it can be resolved. I don't think that it will be the obstacle for privatization, because everybody understands right now that the market is more or less alive, that the pandemic and this quarantine is like not such terrible as it looked half a year ago.
We see the same, yes. We see the same trends.
So it's more political questions that will be resolved when the objects will be ready for privatization.
That's very good to know. So it looks like the 2021 will be the year of large-scale privatizations. That's great. Thank you.
One next point, which I think is important from the privatization standpoint, is acquisition finance. The possibilities to use acquisition finance in a privatization. The benefit of acquisition finance is obviously that you, apart from actually the investors who will be looking into the objects of privatization, you also permit financial institutions, banks, and investors which are only providing debt to participate in the process. And here actually is a typical acquisition finance structure, which normally involves participation of either banking or other facilities, and which, at least from the standpoint of a classical M&A approach and what we see in other countries, especially in CEE, significantly improves the value which you can recover from the sale. However, what we see that from technical standpoint, in Ukrainian privatization, these are rarely used instruments of acquisition finance. and there are many reasons for that, several of which include basically the need to not only use SPV, but also to produce accounts of the SPV, audited accounts of the SPV. Maybe, Taras, you can say us if you have seen such structures used, or maybe it's in the plans of the State Property Fund to actually work on such a structure that may become possible.
Thank you for the question. Frankly speaking, Ihor, according to the current version of the law, privatization law, it's afforded to finance the purchase through debts. So you can have the creditor that will provide you the finance for acquisition. Definitely in Ukraine, unfortunately, as I mentioned, we didn't have very active privatization like for the last 8 years. So this mechanism was used only in like internal for internal purposes by the buyers. But right now, when we are really disclosing everything, when we are moving the huge amount of objects to privatization, definitely we understand that the attraction of external financing, especially from banks, it will be a huge like hint to the whole process. What I can tell, what we see right now, we already saw a few deals, big deals, during last half a year that was financed by banks, local banks. Unfortunately, not by international banks, but by local banks that are more or less a little bit faster compared to international. But some deals were already financed by banks with more or less good ticket size. The second thing is we already preliminarily discussed and raised this question with EBRD, and they are also interested in co-financing of some deals. Because for them it's very interesting to co-finance like some high-tech companies, machinery building companies, so they understand what is the market for these companies, what is the best way to manage these companies. So EBRD is interesting, but this direction should be a little bit more developed and discussed with with EBRD. And I believe that we will be able to have very successful and interesting cases in such direction. So we are open for this, and we already have some examples.
Thank you, Taras. I mean, one of the features of acquisition finance, which is important and which I think some of the investors actually expect to do, is doing this kind of merger of the SPV with the target company, by which you do the debt push down and effectively take over security over these assets, which I think is kind of at the moment not really worked out as a way to do this. So effectively, if we can resolve this issue, then obviously a lot more banks, especially Western banks and actually finance houses which do this type of acquisition finance deals.
We'll work together on this question. We are open to
very interested
discussion.
Yeah. So now we are actually very short of time with our webinar.
Yeah.
So maybe, Taras, a few words you want to say to the participants, the last words.
So I appreciate for your invitation. I appreciate your invitation. It was great that we can discuss such questions right now very openly, and we can attract as Ukrainian as foreign investors to Ukraine. And I would like to emphasize that the approach to local, to foreign
Thank you very much for participation in our webinar. We will post all the presentations and all the materials from our webinar, and we'll share it with the participants. Definitely, there are a number of issues which we have raised, and the State Property Fund is very much interested to see investors, to see advisors, to see all the market, so to say, in reviewing their proposals, and we definitely will contribute and help with the process. Again, I want to emphasize that if you have any questions or issues which you might have regarding privatization in Ukraine, please send this over to us. We will share this with Taras and will provide the responses. And of course, we wish you success with your bids during privatization in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.